Hey guys! Today I want to talk with you about Crown of Midnight, a young adult fantasy novel by Sarah J. Maas. Crown of Midnight was released back in 2013 and it is the second book in the Throne of Glass series. As per usual, we will start this video with a short synopsis, then continue with a non-spoiler review and wrap this video up with the spoilers. If you want to catch up on the previous installment on the series, make sure to check out my video for the Throne of Glass. And if you haven't read this book yet, do not worry, I will make sure to let you know when the spoilers begin. However, you need to keep in mind that this whole video will include the spoilers from the Throne of Glass. So the second book picks up shortly after the events of the first one. We can see that a few months have passed and Celaena has settled into her new role as a king's champion, as well as the life in the court has come back to its usual pre-game space. However, while keeping up the appearances, Celaena doesn't actually feel that letting herself be a dangerous toy in the hands of the king is a good idea. She doesn't want to serve a man who's responsible for the destruction of the world. She doesn't want to kill for him. And yet if she doesn't do as she's bid, people whom she loves will suffer. While dealing with this dilemma, Celaena ends up in even more complicated situation. Not only rumors of rebellion start to spread, but much more dangerous, much more malicious, and definitely non-human forces start to gather in the castle. Now it's the time for Celaena to decide where her true loyalties lie. Overall, I have to say that this book was an incredibly strong sequel. If Throne of Glass just dipped its toes into the cruel and unpredictable fantasy action world, Crown of Midnight jumped into it heads first without thinking twice. This book was so much bolder. It contained better action sequences, more mystery, more magic, better pacing, and better character development. The plot points, or at least majority of them that were set up in the first book, actually came into play, and it was so very satisfying. When I was reading Throne of Glass, I remember feeling that this book doesn't have that much of a coherent story, but it's rather a setup for a bigger story to come. And while Crown of Midnight is also a sequel to a story, which sets up new plot points for future books, it also felt somewhat well-rounded. In a sense, it felt finished. If I would have finished this book back in the day when it was released, and I knew that I will have to wait a year for the third book to come out, I would be excited about the new release, of course, but at the same time, I would have not be annoyed about the wait. As by the end of this book, it truly feels to me that one chapter is being closed and a new chapter will be opened with the air of fire. In addition, there are two main things that made this book for me exceptionally enjoyable. First of them being the fact that while this book is still very much about Celaena and her life, it also gave us more time and better insight into other characters, Kael and Dorian to be precise. While in the Throne of Glass they would appear only when they were needed to further the plot or explain something to us, the readers, in this book we actually get to know both of them, get to spend time with them. And to be honest, both of these men ended up being incredibly interesting and multidimensional characters on their own. And the second thing that made me love this book is the emotional roller coaster this story put me in. While reading it, one second you might feel like you're on the top of the world and another that the things are too dark, too difficult, that there is no way out of the situation the characters got themselves into. Often enough, you think that what they are doing might come back and bite them in the ass. And honestly, most of the time it does. But it comes back with such a magnitude and such raw emotions that it still manages to take you by surprise. So even if you found Throne of Glass to be a bit of a drag for whatever reason, I would still recommend you to give Crown of Midnight a try. Yes, maybe after reading the second part of the story, you will realize that this particular world is just not your cup of tea, and that's okay, but I would definitely urge you to give this book a try before you decide to give up on the whole series, as Crown of Midnight is where the story starts to really shine. On this note, we will be moving to the spoiler review, so if you haven't read this book yet, now it's a great time for you to click off this video. As I have shortly mentioned in the non-spoiler review, in this book we get to know Kael and Dorian, especially Dorian on a much deeper level. Right from the get-go, I felt that Dorian is being a bit of a self-centered douche. And before you attack me for saying something not so very nice about the Dorian Havillard, you have to admit that the reaction Dorian first has to his breakup with Selena is not the most mature one. His assumption that Selena used him and never actually had any feelings for him, first of all, doesn't make any sense. Like, what does he think Selena actually used him for? They made a deal for her to participate in the game, but besides that, Dorian didn't help her in any of the tasks. He didn't dig up any dirt on her competitors, nor did he intervene when it came to Selena's duel with Cain. As far as I can see, during Throne of Glass, Selena asked Dorian for two things: to be able to use the library and to not kill the puppy, which he ends up giving to her. Both very simple, very down-to-earth requests that I'm sure Selena could have asked for without needing to manipulate him and make Dorian fall in love with her in the first place. And secondly, his reaction just shows how much of a sheltered life he led all the way up until now. Something that Selena calls him out on. Now, this felt like a point in the story where Sarah J. Maas could have fallen in young adult trap and make Dorian to be the bad, jealous guy who ruins his relationships and with Selena and with Kyle. Or the author could have decided to make Dorian to continue to pursue Selena despite her being quite clear that this is not what she wants, essentially turning this book into a love triangle. And I can't stress this enough, but I was so incredibly happy to see that Sarah J. Maas didn't do either one of these things. And as the story went on, we see Dorian learning gracefully to let go of the idea of a perfect relationship he and Selena could have had, as well as we see him understanding and supporting Kyle in his pursuit. Instead of being bitter, he became a better friend to her and stayed a great friend to him. Now this grew Dorian as a character in my eyes. For the first time, he was starting to behave like a king and not a still growing teenage crown prince. And the addition of the magic to his character was so great and so unexpected that I couldn't wait to read his chapters and see what happens next. Overall, romance once more was kept to the minimum, and it actually served a purpose. Dorian's love for Selena and the disappointing end to their relationship helps him grow, while Kyle's love for Selena makes him understand that there is much more to life than loyalty and duty. That it's the people in our lives that matter the most, that they are the ones that need to be taken care of and protected. That just following blind commands, even when you disagree with them, only makes you a good soldier. But making your own decisions, fighting for what you think is best, makes you a good person. As for Selena, her love for Kyle and Nehemia were probably the most interesting plot lines to read about, at least emotionally. The way Selena learns to trust them just to end up being betrayed by them. The constant mixture of feelings that she has, the love, the hurt, the guilt of the role she played in all of this. It's not surprising that she went a little off the rails. I think those chapters right after Nehemia's death were some of my favorite chapters in the whole book. The feelings presented in them just felt so raw and so authentic. And to be honest, I love that we got a little bit of the sassy Selena. Sassy Selena might actually be my favorite Selena. That scene where she just marches into the council meeting with Graves' head in her hand like she owns the place. I could easily reread that scene over and over again. Lastly, as for the biggest plot twist, I am sad to say that I got spoiled Selena's true identity before I even started reading the first book of the series. But I mean, that can be expected when you're reading a book which is almost 10 years old. However, even though the news that Selena is actually Aileen wasn't that shocking of an information for me, I think that overall the plot twist was handled perfectly. I think that if I would have not known about it, I would have not been able to predict it. Yet when we reach the last chapter and up in Kyle's head, putting the dots together, everything starts to make sense. All the signs were always there. Anyhow, as I have said in the beginning of this video, I did love this book. In my eyes, it was a very strong and very successful sequel. Something that not only made me truly fall in love with these characters, but also something that made me feel like I must keep on reading just to know how the story will end. But that's just my opinion. What about yours?